Hi, and welcome to this month's newsletter. And just reviewing the last month we've had, it's been a very interesting month. I think it always is, but I hope you agree as well. We kicked off just at the end of May, and I have to mention it again with that special edition where we visited the Australian government's COVID forum. 26 months after the start of the pandemic, the government felt that this was the time to really focus on early intervention and treatment of people with COVID. Now, that statement is mind boggling in itself. And it dovetailed into the whole story about the illusion of evidence based medicine and the role that key opinion leaders and product champions for the pharmaceutical industry play. And the reason I actually saved you the need to go through 2 hours and gave you some highlights, and I couldn't resist commenting, was that it was an example of four senior Australian health officials in public health: Brendan Murphy, Paul Kidd, the Chief Medical Officer, Paul Kelly, the Chief Medical Officer, Michael Kidd, the Deputy Chief Medical Officer, John Skerritt, the head of the TGA, Alan Cheng, the head of ATAGI, and who else was there? I think that was basically it. But they are all what the British Medical Journal points out are key opinion leaders and product champions, and it was an example of championing four new patented drugs. So that then led to a healthy bite on the Great Reset, because if you're following the Great Reset, and you don't have to be subscribing to any conspiracy theory, because it's outlined really clearly on their website what the agenda is. And that is basically, and I quote, I think it's something like, "You will own nothing and you will be happy." That's ultimately the aim. And if evidence is anything to go by, I just heard a recent article from Oxfam, a recent interview from Oxfam, which is a not for profit organization dedicated to feeding the world, that the top billionaires in the world, all of which attended the Great Reset, of course, the World Economic Forum, and a part of the Great Reset, doubled their wealth in the last 2 years. So they actually earned more in the last 2 years than they did in the previous 20 or so years. So the business model is certainly being turbocharged, and I would recommend you have a listen to that one. And as a contrast to that, I had the opportunity of speaking to really one of, I think, a really inspiring woman who has dedicated over 40 years to local futures, which I think the pandemic has alerted us all to, that our local community, the people that we come into contact with, and the fact that we can access food and resources from our own country locally, rather than this mad preoccupation with globalization, which is certainly working well for the upper echelon of the business world, but for us on the ground, local futures is the way to go. And we celebrated World Local Futures Day with Helena Norberg Hodge, and she is a truly inspiring person, and the movement is something that I totally support. And I thought it was an opportunity also to celebrate, because in Australia we have just had a change of government, which went very smoothly, I must say. And I think it's a real testament to democracy in Australia, that the transition from what I considered to be an awful government for the last 10 or 12 years. They were so out of their depth on so many different levels. And I think the commentators and the business world all agreed that the level of incompetence was breathtaking. And we have a new government, which remains to be seen if they're any better. I always feel that whoever's in power, it's always good to change governments after a certain amount of time. And interestingly, in Australia, we have appointed an unprecedented number of independent candidates. in my own electorate in Sydney, which was traditionally a Liberal or Conservative um, member here for almost the entire history of this electorate, is now being represented by a woman, Allegra Spender, who has had an enormous amount of experience in the business world and at senior levels of management. And so she is not only a woman, not only independent, she's intelligent. And I think the more independents that are in government, the better, that are in Parliament, the better. My hope was that actually it would be a change of government with a minority government that required them to constantly consult with independents. I think that's a good thing. But anyway, that was a very smooth transition in Australia. And when we look into America at the literal circus, which is American politics, then we just have to see the January 6th congressional meetings, which are very encouraging to think that actually an investigation is going on as to the circus which was last year's American election. And anyway, that was World Localization Day. Then we had another special edition because I was invited. I have the honor of being on the editorial board of the Orthomolecular News Service, which is a resource that I would encourage you to explore because the articles and the information on there about nutritional medicine, and in particular the use of orthomolecular medicine, which is basically the use of supplements, is there in spade loads. And whenever you hear a so-called expert, perhaps even your own doctor, say, oh, there's no evidence to support the use of any nutritional supplements in healthcare, your alarm bells should be going off, because what they really should be saying is they haven't read the literally thousands of articles on this very topic. And hey, let's be clear, evidence based medicine is not everything it's cracked up to be. And the world of orthomolecular medicine and the world of pharmaceutical medicine all has loophole. None of it's perfect. But one thing you can definitely say is that nutrients, as in orthomolecular nutrients like the water soluble vitamins B and C, the B complex and the C's, and the water soluble minerals, calcium, magnesium, zinc, selenium, and the fat soluble vitamins like A, D, E, and K, and coenzyme Q and ubiquinol, and we could go on and on. But one thing we can say for sure is that all of those nutrients are part of every not every, but part of the biochemical processes that go on in our bodies, in every cell in our bodies. So there is no question that orthomolecular nutrients have a place in the human body. I know that's well, it's not even a controversial statement, although to some medical professionals that may well be a controversial statement. But that is the truth, and there is no deficiencies in pharmaceutical products. All too often, pharmaceutical products are researched by companies themselves or companies that the pharmaceutical industry has engaged and are therefore considered to be independent researchers. But actually, if you are being paid to research something and you want more research coming your way, then there's a conflict of interest there. So that was really interesting to have that discussion with one of the leaders in the Orthomolecular News Service group, Dr. Richard Cheng, who we've also had on as guests. We've had several guests from the Orthomolecular News Service on my podcast, Unstressed. People like Andrew Saul, Thomas Levy, Michael Gonzalez, Todd Penberthy, and we've had many people from the Orthomolecular News Service. Ian Brighthope, of course, we've had on several times. So when they contacted me and we had a discussion about brain size, because of the book that I have been exploring for my own book, Evolution Bites Back, I've been looking at our evolutionary journey as Homo sapiens, and it turns out that from our journey over the last 4 or 5 million years from when we split, I think we split from our chimpanzee gorilla cousins. And remember, we share 99% of our genetic information with them, or 98 or 99%. But at that time, 6 million years ago, when we stood up on two legs and became and emerged as Australopithecus, our brain size was around similar to the apes, which was around 400 cc's. And as Homo habilis discovered the use or the consumption of meat, our brain size increased to around 700 cc's, and then Homo erectus about 1.8 million years ago, as they incorporated more meat and actually the use of fire to make food more bioavailable, so nutrient dense food more bioavailable. Our brain size for Homo erectus increased to around 1,000 cc's. And then, as we developed into anatomically modern humans around 300,000 years ago, and we were consuming an omnivorous diet of both meat and some available fruits and root vegetables or whatever, but mainly we were eating those kind of meats which we were cooking and making more bioavailable to us. Our brain size as anatomically modern humans reached 1450 cc's. So remember, we went from Australopithecus, our apes, 400 cc's, to 700 cc's, to 1,000 cc's, to 1450 cc's. How did that happen? We started to eat nutrient-dense foods, and meats were an important part of that journey, which dovetails back into the World Economic Forum and the Great Reset and the movement of the vegan movement, which, as I've said on many occasions, I believe these well-meaning people, vegans, are unwittingly becoming the foot soldiers for the ultra-processed food industry. And if you're looking at plant-based, as I've seen ads for plant-based chickens and plant-based hamburgers and plant-based calamari and plant-based this, that is an exercise in ultra-processed foods. And I think if you want to eat vegetables, that's fine. We're going to be doing a program on why vegetables are not everything they're cracked up to be. Remember, vegetables, even though they are stationary, unable to protect themselves by running away from predators, have to have chemicals which act as deterrents for insects and animals which would be consuming vegetables. So those toxins are things like oxalates, phytates, salicylates, FODMAPs, lectins, and even if things like gluten are not actually a toxin to deter predators, they also are highly inflammatory. And so people who are on, and I see this in my clinic quite often, people who are on, in inverted commas, a perfectly healthy diet. I'm a vegetarian. I eat only vegetables, organic vegetables. That may still be not the right diet for you. So we explored brain size through the discussion with Dr. Richard Cheng. And what was also interesting about that was that, I come back to brain size, anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, had a brain size of 1450 cc's. But hey, guess what? Since the agricultural revolution, our brain size our cranial size, which holds our brain, has reduced to around 1250 cc's. So not only have our jaws reduced in size, and we go on to explore that at the end of the month with Dr. Dave Singh, or Professor Dave Singh from Stanford University, and we go on in this next month to explore that a lot more. Not only have our jaws narrowed, our teeth have become crowded. Our teeth have become crowded. We don't have enough room for all 32 of the teeth we've evolved to have. And why is that important? Because the shape and size of your mouth determines the shape and size of your upper airway. And that means your nasal passages, sinuses, and pharynx. So that's housing your tongue, and that leads to dysfunctional breathing and poor sleep. And that is why I believe that sleep and breathe are of the five pillars of health: sleep, breathe, nourish, move, and think. Sleep and breathe are foundational, and it's why we're exploring reduction in cranial and facial development. And in the coming months, we're going to be talking to a lot of people about that. But that's why it's important to all of us. Are you fulfilling your epigenetic potential? Meaning your genes have 32 teeth in them, and yet your genes have not expressed themselves to provide enough space for those 32 teeth. And that has implications on your health. And so we talked about, coming back to Richard Cheng's discussion about anatomically modern humans. And I was reading I stumbled upon a very interesting fact, which I wasn't aware of, and that was some 70,000 years ago, anatomically modern humans developed a symbiotic relationship with the tuberculosis bacterium. Now, tuberculosis bacterium, of course, has very serious implications for our health in terms of TB, and many people have died. But it turns out there are two different forms of tuberculosis. One is the human form, the other is the animal form. And when we moved in after the agricultural revolution, we moved into villages where we were living in much closer proximity, not just with other humans and all the sanitary challenges that brought on, but we also lived in much closer contact with the domesticated animals, and that led to these bacteria jumping between species, and the animal form of tuberculosis has serious implications. But coming back to the human form, which we formed a symbiotic relationship with 70,000 years ago, it turns out that tuberculosis human form produces a very important vitamin for us, and that is vitamin B3, nicotinamide or niacin. And that B3 has huge implications on our brain development. So I thought that was a real aha moment when I read this research, and I wanted to share it with you in the Healthy Bite. I go into it in a lot more detail. But something rather remarkable happened 70,000 years ago, and that was after 200 and so thousand years of living in Africa, we got up and started to move across the world, and we populated the world within 5 or 10,000 years at least. So that was a very interesting thing which we explored in this month. So it's been a really fascinating month. We've got a great month ahead. We're going to be talking to some remarkable people about airway and breathing. We're going to be talking about to people about the pandemic again. This is a very interesting topic on so many different levels. So I encourage you to stay tuned. I encourage you also, if you're a regular listener to the podcast, go and leave some reviews, because we want this message to get out to a much broader audience. I hope this finds you well. I hope you're enjoying all that we're providing, and we've got some exciting things happening in the next few months, which I'll share with you as these months unfold. Hope this finds you well. Until next time, this is Dr. Ron Ehrlich.